Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 6 of Days Gone By, the review series for Gran Turismo's pretty broad selection and quite an eclectic mix as well of classic cars and also some vintage cars. As I've mentioned before on the channel, I like vintage cars. I think that Gran Turismo needs more of them. Currently we have very, very few, less than a handful even, of genuinely useful or even just vintage cars in general, let alone useful ones. Of the vintage cars that we do have, this is by far the fastest. And in fact, despite being the oldest car in the game, currently at least, it's still one of the fastest cars in the game. It's also one of my personal favourite vehicles of the Gran Turismo series since it was first introduced on GT4, and it's the 1937 Audi V16, specifically the Type C Streamline model. Now, Audi made quite a few different versions of this kind of vehicle, Grand Prix racers. They made some that were aerodynamically more efficient and some that were more just competition spec. This is one of those more aerodynamic cars, as you can pretty obviously tell, and that's what's called the Streamliner. It was built for speed records, and it killed its driver, Bernd Rosemeyer, and it was believed to be travelling, some say in excess of 260 miles per hour, some say even 290 miles per hour. That seems a little bit unrealistic, but you never know. At the time of his death on an autobahn, which was unfortunate. On the game, there is no threat of death, so you can drive the car as fast as possible, and that's never an issue. It's one of the great things about racing games. So, on the game, this car should, for any who maybe haven't ever driven it on the Gran Turismo games, be slightly different, surely, to the newer cars. It uses vastly outdated tech compared to today. In fact, there's very little technology on the car at all. It has no lights, no visible forms of downforce, and various other things that make it look relatively outdated. And in some ways it kind of is. But for what it's good at, it really, really is good at those things. Now, it's powered by a 6-litre turbocharged V16. The V16 is probably my favourite V-type engine configuration. It's used in a couple of my favourite cars, including the Chiazzetta V16T, the Cadillac 16 concept, and also notably this vehicle. One of the advantages of a V16 engine, and also potentially having even more cylinders, although nobody really does that, is that the more pistons, obviously in the more cylinders you have, the smoother the engine can be made to be, because the time between power strokes is reduced. And it makes the car smoother, it gives it a very distinctive sound. Many of those old Grand Prix cars that did use V16s sound very unique, to say the least. And it also gives you a few other advantages, most of which aren't really that relevant on the game. On the game, it really boils down to just being a bit quirky and different. Apart from that, the differences aren't really hugely noticeable as they would be in real life. Now, the engine doesn't put out a huge amount of power by today's standards. It is technically kind of a formula vehicle, being in effect a Grand Prix car. But that engine puts out just over 500 horsepower in stock form, stock of course being very relative for this car, and you can tune it up to a maximum of 743 horsepower, which doesn't sound like all that much, and it isn't really all that much. But this is an amazingly aerodynamic car. It's a single-seater for a start, which means that the cockpit area is virtually non-existent. It has no headlights, and although you may not realise it, designing the front end of a car, including headlights, is what holds back a lot of cars from being much more aerodynamic, because you have to shape the car in a certain way to be able to incorporate those headlights. So if you just delete the headlights altogether, you can have a much more aerodynamic front end. Now, the car only weighs 1,000 kilos, that's exactly 1 tonne, so it's pretty easy to work out the horsepower per tonne. it's 743. The torque is also very good, not surprisingly for a large capacity V16, 782 foot-pounds. But it's in a 1937 vehicle with quite possibly the worst steering range of any car in the game. And I would actually say that this is possibly even worse than the Jay Leno tank car in terms of its lock-to-lock steering capabilities. The Jay Leno tank car is a very underestimated vehicle, and I've used it to win races in career mode. I used the Jay Leno tank car to win the Tour of America series, and that was up against Vipers, Corvettes and various others, but I still won. This car is much more difficult to get around most tracks, and the reason why is actually kind of interesting, and that is you have to be going fast to be able to turn. Once you get below, say, 60 miles per hour, the handling becomes so heavy, so stiff, that you just can't get it around corners. So the actual amount of tracks that you can genuinely use this car on effectively is almost none, unfortunately. The only tracks where it is really, really useful to use it is Special Stage Route X, predominantly for endurance races, because the fuel economy on this car is fantastic. I've actually, in online races, got this car to do 6 laps of Special Stage Route X on a tank of fuel. But apart from tracks like Route X and Route 7, maybe High Speed Ring, but even then not that much, as you can see from this video, it's more of a collector's piece, unfortunately, than a car which is genuinely usable. Now, you can make it usable. You can reduce the power down significantly, add some ballast to ground the wheels more, and it will be a serviceable race car. But even then, it's kind of not even worth doing. I would only recommend this car to someone who specifically wants a historically significant collector's piece, because for 500,000 credits, and being as it is a 300 mile per hour machine, as a collector's piece, it's an awesome car. Just don't expect it to turn corners. But that's it overall for this particular episode. Certainly a very unique car on the game. And I'll see you guys next time. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.